With the 2024 presidential election, we have just witnessed the distinction between two extremely different visions for America. And the American people have made a clear, decisive, and unmistakable choice in choosing Donald Trump to be the 47th president of the United States of America. And I'm not attempting to be a political analyst or an armchair quarterback, but there is much to be learned from the decision the American people have made. The Democratic Party platform and progressive ideology was completely rejected and completely failed. And I first want to say that as a pastor, let me clearly say that regardless of who sits in the Oval Office, if I am theologically honest, like any pastor, no human can make America great, and no human can bring hope and joy. Only Jesus can do that. Psalms 127 says, unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. So despite the outcome of the election, this is no time to put our trust in President Trump or in any politician. Unless God builds America and guards our nation can and will be destroyed. Friends, America's future is not guaranteed. And furthermore, we must be careful to avoid the pitfall of political idolatry, and we must not co-sign biblical Christianity with political conservatism. These are not the same. Considering the overwhelming outcome of the election, all the claims of Donald Trump being like Hitler, the accusations of fascism, racism, and misogyny, the indictments, the fear-mongering, the claims of him being a threat to democracy, claims of him being unstable and unhinged, the billions of dollars raised and spent in campaign funds, campaigning against him, the cadre of celebrities that tried to influence people to vote against him, the power of corporate media opposing him, the chastising of men, specifically black men, which I'll talk about in a moment, the claims that women's lives are in danger, and on. Friends, none of it worked, which tells you something. The majority of the American people didn't buy any of it and declared the Democratic Party, declared to them that we are a nation of independent and free-thinking people. Just because you label somebody as something doesn't mean that your label is true. The American people rejected bully politics, and the Democratic Party should note that their tactics completely failed. Personally, my heart goes out to Vice President Kamala Harris because I believe, unfortunately, the Democratic Party used her, if we're honest. The ultimate goal of political parties is basically to win, and to throw an unknown, rather inexperienced elected leader into a presidential race without going through the primary election process, it was a setup to fail. Doing so put her and any individual in her role in a position to fail. When you don't caucus at a primary level and compete against other candidates in your own party to defend your policies and build your base over time, your campaign won't be refined enough or strong enough to adequately compete as a presidential nominee. Your undeveloped policies, they just won't stand, and that was unfair to her. Yet she chose to play the political game and assert herself politically and really go in attack mode against her opponent. Something that I think is tragic about American politics on both sides is the obvious propensity to lie, fake, manipulate, and deceive, and pretend to be something you're really not just because your party needs you to be. Integrity in politics would allow candidates to be honest and to state that they are simply not qualified for positions that they're often pushed into. And instead of experimenting with the lives of hundreds of millions of people in America and around the world, they should just be honest. But it seems that the lust for power and the lust to stay in power won't allow them to do so, unfortunately. And what's worse is when the American people can clearly see that a candidate is not ready to do the job, but that candidate continues to talk down to voters as if they're stupid and less than and are incapable of making an independent decision for themselves. And that behavior really suggests arrogance and imperialism and pride, and it insults people by looking down on them. You know, with all due respect, I would say as a Christian Black American man who is a God-fearing, committed husband and father, I want to highlight something that I believe was very much problematic for the Democratic Party for guys like me. Take a look at this.
I also want to say that that seems to be more pronounced with the brothers. So if you don't mind, just for a second, I'm going to speak to y'all directly. And you're coming up with all kinds of reasons and excuses. I've got a problem with that. Because part of it makes me think, and I'm speaking to men directly now, part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president. And you're coming up with other alternatives and other reasons for that. And I think anybody you are talking to in a barbershop, anybody you are talking to in your house, in your family, at church, who is coming with that kind of attitude, I think you have to ask them, well, how can that be? Because the women in our lives have been getting our backs this entire time. They've been raising us and working and having our backs. And when we get in trouble and the system's not working for us, they're the ones who are out there marching and protesting. And so now you're thinking about sitting out or even supporting somebody who has a history of denigrating you because you think that's a sign of strength, because that's what being a man is, putting women down. That's not acceptable. That's not, this shouldn't even be a question.
So to the men who love us, the only people who have standing to make these decisions are women with the advice of their doctors. We are the ones with the knowledge and experience to know what we need. So please do not hand our fates over to the likes of Trump, who knows nothing about us, who has shown deep contempt for us. Because a vote for him is a vote against us, against our health, against our worth. And let me tell you all, to think that the men that we love could be either unaware or indifferent to our plight is simply heartbreaking. It is a sad statement about our value as women in this world. It is both a setback in our quest for equity and a huge blow to our country's standing as a world leader on issues of women's health and gender equality. So fellas, before you cast your votes, ask yourselves, what side of history do you want to be on? But to anyone out there thinking about sitting out this election or voting for Donald Trump or a third-party candidate in protest because you're fed up, let me warn you, your rage does not exist in a vacuum. If we don't get this election right, your wife, your daughter, your mother, we as women will become collateral damage to your rage. Prepared to look into the eyes of the women and children you love and tell them that you supported this assault on our safety? And to the women listening, We have every right to demand that the men in our lives do better by us. We have to use our voices to make these choices clear to the men that we love. Our lives are worth more than their anger and disappointment. And we are more than just baby-making vessels. And if you are a woman who lives in a household of men that don't listen to you or value your opinion, just remember that your vote is a private matter. Regardless of the political views of your partner, you get to choose. You get to use your judgment and cast your vote for yourself and the women in your life. Remember, women, standing up for what is best for us can make the difference in this election. So let us use our voices in these final days to make it plain to the men in our lives that we need to stand not with Trump, but with us. We need them to vote for the only candidate in this race who will protect our lives. We need them to vote for Kamala Harris.
So, friends, this lecture that Michelle Obama gave, it did not promote or encourage or assume healthy marriages and healthy families. I can say again as a pastor that abstinence and sex within the context of marriage is still God's way. So reproductive rights or abortion is not a viable means of contraception for sexual promiscuity and sexual immorality in a way that is completely irresponsible. By nature, I'm a zero victim thinker who refuses to be offended. But if I was to be offended, I would be offended by the disrespectful tone I heard from the Obamas toward black men and men in general. To make repeated statements that our mothers, our wives, our daughters, would be in danger if we didn't vote for Kamala and that we are to be blamed for their peril. Friends, that's deeply offensive to men. It crosses a line. I believe they dishonored the millions of men of noble character who would gladly die for the women they love. And not only that, as a man, I'm called by God to be a protector of the women God has placed in my life and of my family. I don't care who is president. By God's grace and with his help, my mom, my wife, and my daughter, and all the women around me will continue to be safe, blessed, and highly favored. And I don't need Kamala Harris or the Democratic Party to do that for me, because government is not my God. Before I end, let me just say this. Whether your candidate of choice won or didn't win, it's my personal prayer, sincerely, that healing and unity will take place in our nation and also within the church. I'm very much disappointed about the division we're seeing between the so-called black church and white church. And I want to especially call on those like me who are Christians to do better and be better, to be more like Jesus. We really need to do that. It's perfectly okay for us to proudly stand by our political choice as citizens, but it's not okay for us to be unlike Christ in doing so. We can win in the eyes of people on earth and lose in the eyes of God in heaven because we were so unloving, offensive, unkind, insensitive, and uncompassionate in our witness as Christ followers. May God help us to share the love of Jesus Christ with those who don't believe what we believe, knowing that each of them is precious in the eyes of God and represents a soul that Jesus loves and died for to save. Now that the election is over, friends, our work continues as ambassadors for Christ, as being salt and light in a dark and a decaying world. I want to invite you also to join us in praying for America and to help us rebuild the altar of the Lord by joining our apolitical National Prayer Altar movement at nationalprayeraltar.com or by texting ALTAR to 833-541-0522. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and like and share this message. Let me know if this is helpful and I'll create more videos. I'll see you next time.